my real exchange was 0.6, and we missed the world record by 0.2 or 3. So
0.6. Daniel, what are you doing?
You was having coffee, said hi. Good swim.
We were so far in front, I didn't want to like F up. And
did you guys exchange suits?
But Thorpe had this. Thorpe had when he came into touch, he had like a long glide, like he's using that extension of those massive arms. So
you cannot blame this on the swimmer coming in.
I am. So yeah, it was almost a flat. Well, it was a flat start, really.
Welcome to Social Kick. I'm Brian Lundquist. We got a treat today. Luke Paddington, and joining us from Down Under, an Aussie legend, a swimmer of many laps, Daniel Kowalski. What's going on, Daniel? How are you?
Good day, fellas. I'm doing well. It's great to be here.
I told you we can't relate because Luke and I are both pure sprinters, and the Aussie connection I have through my college coach Brett Hawk and pro coach Brett Hawk was a swimmer of one lappers. So we've got a lot to learn from somebody like you who spent so much time staring at the black line. I don't know how you did it, but we're really excited. I have to ask you, what do you remember about your last race as an elite athlete?
Yeah, it was trials for Commonwealth Games and Pampax in 2002. I swam, I think, at 15:29 and came third in the 1500. And I knew as soon as I touched the wall that was probably going to be it. I didn't make the Commonwealth Games team. I got nominated to the Pampac team and eventually selected, and I pulled out and decided that, I was never going to get anywhere close to what I used to be able to hit. And so it was a perfect time for me to stop. And it was a horrible 30 laps. It was real bad.
Yeah, I was going to ask, you must have known what you're going like halfway through. You must have felt what it was like. And when you touch the wall, maybe not a surprise. And like, describe those feelings to touch the wall after such a storied career.
Well, I was pretty desperate. I even wore a bodysuit because I wanted to have as much possible advantage as possible. Listen, my lead up had been really disrupted. I'd had 2 shoulder reconstructions post Sydney. I was essentially getting a cortisone every 6 weeks. And after the cortisone, I would kick for pretty much 2-3 weeks and then build up one arm and then build up to swimming again. So I knew it was going to be hit and miss, but I'd done a lot of work obviously in the past. And so I had that foundation. But in the end, it was just strength. I just had no strength. And, I dived in, Grant Hackett took off, Craig Stevens was well and truly in front of me after halfway. And I was just like, I want this thing to head. It was hot and humid in the Brisbane pool. And yeah, I was just, as soon as I got to the end, I was like, nah, I don't think I want to do this anymore.
At one point you held the world record. Yeah, talk about that. That's interesting.
Yeah. What was that, sorry?
Talk about you realize you don't want to do this anymore. You were, 2002. How old are you? 13?
27.
27.
Whoa.
Yeah.
No, I a lot of my work was rehab. I was forever like doing various exercises to strengthen the shoulders. I was forever in ice baths, forever in ice packs. I was always on a bike. I was doing very little swimming. I was doing majority kick with the snorkel on. And so it just wasn't fun. It wasn't what I remembered. And I actually loved training more than I loved racing. And so the fact that training was starting to become tiresome, repetitive, boring, it was a real sign to me that, hey, this is probably time to call it quits. And like I said, I mean, Grant Hackett was about to go on an absolute tear. Ian Thorpe was starting to dabble in longer distances. And I just really I couldn't beat them at my best. So I wasn't going to be able to do it with basically one arm.
Was that at a time when you were, in your mid to late 20s? Now, I mean, that's still pretty late for swimming. I think my career ended around that same age with much less success. But I think that it's interesting to see now how people around that age range aren't necessarily thinking about walking away if they're still having success. You know, and did that impact your decision at all? Did you have this, besides the enjoyment from the sport, were there other things in life that were tugging at you that were kind of part of the reason why that enjoyment wasn't there? Or was it purely just about sport for you?
No, I was very conscious of the fact that I needed to finish school. You know, I was been nearly 9 years since I'd started university, and I was still going. And I guess it was a little bit different in the sense of there were less commercial opportunities from swimming per se. There were a number of those outside of the pool that, because I was a part of a very fortunate era, that you could make quite a decent living. But at the end of the day, I needed a job, right? And I needed experience. And as long as I was swimming and having to do the rehab and having to do all those other things outside of the pool just to be able to get in the pool, I kind of knew that I had to weigh up the pros and cons of both. And the reality was, being closer to 30 and not having had a proper job at that point in time, it was probably time that I started focusing on that a little bit more. And the reality was with all that extra stuff outside of actually swimming in the pool, I wasn't going to be able to do both. But more than anything was the fact that I couldn't lift my arms in the morning. I couldn't brush my teeth. I had this, numb sensation in the back of my neck. There were so many factors physically and then starting to weigh me mentally that I was just like relieved when I made the call to say, hey, this is it.
Daniel, let's talk about that transition then. Let's talk about that transition from 2002 to now. What you've been up to, and how you transitioned to not just being a swimmer to being Daniel Kowalski. What you've been doing since, and maybe what you're doing right now.
Yeah, so I feel very fortunate when it came to transition. Like I said, I had probably 8 subjects left to go on my degree. And then so I just knuckled down on that. I'd had no work experience. And so I did an internship at one of our professional football teams. And then by the time I graduated, I went into full-time athlete management. So I worked for a company that managed the likes of Ian Thorpe, Libby Trickett, Liesl Jones, for example, from a swimming point of view, and learned very early on that wasn't for me. I didn't really want to be that type of person in that type of role. The well-being of the athlete and the person was very important to me, something I was passionate about. I went on to work at the organising committee for the 2007 World Swimming Championships. When that concluded, I tried my hand at coaching, and I ended up at the University of Wisconsin for 2 years. Wow. Absolutely hated that. I say that with all due respect, but one, coaching was not for me. It is such an incredible skill, and I did not have that skill. I enjoyed the interaction and the banter with the athletes and just talking to them outside the pool, but I wasn't built to be a coach, and I have so much respect for what coaches are able to do. I came back to Australia and ended up heading up the union for Australian swimmers for about 8-9 years, which was a really interesting exercise in the sense that the sport had quite a bit of turmoil in the time that I was there. And so having to work through that, working for the swimmers, but at a time when the sport was really struggling was a massive learning experience for me on so many different levels. And that parlayed into the role I have now, which is Head of Olympian Services at the Australian Olympic Committee. So I'm primarily responsible for, the alumni, the wellbeing transition, and then at games time, head up a team within the village, and we try to ensure that we deliver the athletes and team members the best possible experience at the games. And so it's incredible to be able to be in this role and to work across so many sports across summer and winter games. I feel really lucky.
So I read an article saying you help athletes make a difficult transition to everyday life after retirement as well. Talk about that as well. Talk about, do you focus on their financial well-being, their mental well-being? Talk about what you might do.
So the sports system in Australia, if you are, at the elite level or aspiring on the pathway, there's incredible resources and services available to you. For example, A lot of the top Olympic sports, they have a dedicated wellbeing and engagement manager, which works one-on-one with their elite athletes to do exactly that, help them in their careers outside of their day-to-day training environment. So from an Olympic Committee point of view, we provide a number of programs, services, and opportunities to assist those athletes whilst they're still being an athlete. So basically they get the opportunity to work one-on-one with a career coach to sort of map out what it is that they are looking for. So if it is for career advice or regarding education, if it's about transitioning out and getting help with employment and how to position yourself to be able to get that particular job, because as you both know, that particularly when it comes to a sport like swimming and some other Olympic sports where there's training required in some cases 3 times a day, you don't get that real life experience to be able to put on your resume, but you bring so many other skills and attributes to an organization. So getting athletes to be able to be in a position to clearly articulate that and talk about it as passionately as they can about their career. As you talk about your best time, you should be able to talk about your best attributes in the same way. So we're trying to upskill genuinely in a passionate way for these athletes to be able to move on with their life. In some cases, do it in a dual career perspective, give them that outlook, that ability to look just beyond the black line when it comes to the case of swimming, to be as best prepared to have as a successful career away from their sport as one they had in it.
Beyond the Black Line is a really good Instagram tag for a good friend of ours who's like this amazing marathons from a cat breed. Anyway, so what did you pull from your experiences that helps you do what you do now?
Oh man,
How long do we have?
Yeah. Listen, I'm pretty open when I talk about. I have a lot of regrets with my career. I feel part of that was really struggling with my identity and who I am, and I feel like that really had a big impact between my ears when I stood up on the blocks, particularly I guess in the latter half of my career. So my key learnings and takeaway is the importance of just being able to be your genuine true self every single day. And if I could have my time again, I wish I could have been able to do that earlier, and I've been able to bring that into so many different facets of my life today. And for me, that's really, really important, because it's, for some people, whatever their personal problem or what they're really struggling with is, it can get to a point, as we sadly see on so many different occasions, too much for some people. So I wish I had been able to deal with that a lot earlier.
In any way, Daniel, do you feel like envious of the era that we're in right now? Because it seems to me like we're in the prime period for mental health appreciation, patience, awareness. And that's not to say that there isn't a lot of public scrutiny around athletes who say enough is enough and aren't able to handle the stage of the competition because of what's going on behind the scenes, whether that be, some prominent recent examples in Simone Biles or Caleb Dressel stepping away from the sport, and many others. I wonder what it's like for you to witness that type of thing when you, having reflected on your career so many years post, that you have these wishes that things were different for you at the time. Do you think that there was something about the era that was influential to you and the way that you carried about your business and your life when you swam?
I think it's important to point out that I had resources and support available. I just wasn't strong enough to accept that I needed that support. For me, that was a sign of weakness and vulnerability, which is so stupid. But that was there, and I chose not to accept it. Am I envious of today? Absolutely not. I would hate to live in an era where you can be so easily scrutinized, where for your own commercial well-being and support, you need to have social media. Because as much as we like to think that there's a lot of commercial and prize money available, it's not enough to to make ends meet in a lot of people's cases. So they need social media, they need the followers to be able to justify to a brand or a company that, hey, I can get this much exposure for your brand. But with that comes the negative, and dealing with that every single day, when, particularly in my case, when I was very vulnerable and when I was very anxious and I didn't have that self-belief, there's no way in the world I could cope with that. And so for the young people today who need that, hats off to them, who are strong enough to deal with that. And whilst it's great that people are talking about it and people are being more open and honest, it's a minefield out there. And it must be really difficult to navigate.
Coming from a country like Australia, where from the outside we always hear about how popular swimming is there and how aware the Australian public is about their swimming stars. And I was at a World Cup meet recently and was able to meet Kyle Chalmers and have some good chats with him. And it seemed, that was my first time meeting him in person. It seemed like he was in a really good space, but having gone through some rough periods with the media and just the attention and what can come with all of that. What is it like to be a prominent Olympic medal winning swimmer in Australia? What is that attention like? And how does it affect, you on a daily basis?
It's funny. I feel like as I mentioned before, I was very fortunate to be part of an era that was truly special. And, when you had, particularly Sydney 2000 with the team, sort of led by Kieran and Susie O'Neill, based off, their experience and longevity. But, Ian Thorpe and Grant Hackett were coming through. Michael Klim was an absolute stud. It was so cool just to sort of sit back and watch this sort of play out, because there were so many fans. There was a lot of interest from the media. There was even elements of paparazzi around, and being on a periphery for that was quite bizarre. But the beauty was there was no social media. There was 4 major television networks. There wasn't the abundance of platforms and opportunities that are out there today. So it was quite insular in some regards, as opposed to today. Whilst we have tremendous success, and I think the swimming team in particular last year in Tokyo did a phenomenal job. Which, if they had got those results maybe 15, 20 years ago, it really would have been huge news. Not that it wasn't, but it was a 24-hour news cycle, and next thing, someone's put something on Twitter, or someone's posted something on TikTok and it goes viral, or someone's doing something on a podcast, whatever it may be. Things move so quickly. There's so many more opportunities out there. There's so many more sports for young people to take part in. It's a cluttered market. So I think today, whilst the athletes' performances are incredible, they're inspiring, both for us as retired athletes, but also for young kids in this country and those who love their sport. It's trying to cut through all that. And so that I'm biased. I don't think they get the accolades that they deserve, but I feel very fortunate that I was able to be a part of this incredible era, and this current crew are no different. They're just trying to fight their way through all the traffic.
I do want to ask you about the eras of swimming, but I want to get to that a little deeper. Gary Hall he told us he was misrepresented in his comment about smashing him like guitars. Because if you had actually read the whole paragraph, you would see the context of setting. But it's an example of how the media can take what they need to serve an agenda, and how that went off. And social media, that's times a million right now, absolutely, and we see it. But at the same time, it's almost a representation matters idea. I mean, on our show alone, we've had people open up to about when they want to commit suicide, mental health, depression. We had the first openly gay athlete who qualified for a U.S. Olympic team she was out, and she talked about that. We had people talk about Black Power movement. And I was wondering if having these openly conversations would have maybe helped as well. It would have helped me because I could have I wish I had these podcasts when I was swimming in the 90s, because I would have got to know and maybe relate to more and give me some more strength, more confidence, and it's okay, Luke. You're not the only one, kind of thing. No.
100%. You can't be what you can't see, right? So for me, I agree with that. I would have loved to have some more visibility, particularly around the sexuality thing, but also around this, mental health, how to manage that anxiety, all these things around the well-being of the whole athlete, not just the physical side of things. Plenty of books out there to read, I'm sure, but hearing peer-to-peer and having those opportunities, it's so powerful. And I agree. I would have loved that. It would have brought this sense of being closer, a stronger community as well.
We also had the Paralympic swimmer on our last show, and that's something. I'm so embarrassed that I'm not aware what swimming classifications are in para swimming. That's an embarrassing thing for me. In Australia, you guys are way ahead of the field where you have para and swimming trials together. I have no idea. We're so young in dealing with gender classification for swimming, especially here in the US and where we're going there. So it's just a lot of conversation, and that's how we get closer, right? It's conversation and listening and talking. So yeah, in the 90s, it must have been very difficult. Absolutely. That's what I found.
Yeah, I went to a conference at the end of last year. It was actually a women in sport conference in Auckland, New Zealand. And one of the key takeaways for me from that conference was this focus on youth, and you can't be me without me. And they talked about how people are making decisions on young people's lives without consulting the young people. And for me, that really resonated, because so many people make decisions that impact the lives of young people, but haven't even taken that step to talk to them to see if they're actually on the right path. Is that policy going to be reflective?
Yeah.
And for me, that was really important. And so in the programs that we're looking at delivering this year, that is one of the things that's driving what I want to do is, consulting with the young people or the younger Olympians to ensure that, hey, are we on the right track here? Is this what you're actually looking for? We can't assume. So like, just because I was an elite athlete 25 years ago doesn't mean I know what elite athletes want today. And so that you can't be me without me is something that resonates in my head all the time.
I appreciate that, because the World Aquatics, now formerly FINA, I used to criticize just the coaching in America. 16% of female head coaches in NCAA swimming, 15% of head coaches in the NCAA Division I are female, right? Of women's teams. That works out to be about 20 kids out of 200. And I was like, we need to start representation there. But beyond that, to the governing committees, to USA Swimming, and then to FINA as well. And the Athletes Commission at FINA is a huge step to that direction and importance, so that World Aquatics can talk to the athletes, can talk to the former athletes, and make that bond. You want to talk about that, how World Aquatics is continuing to make efforts to move forward?
Yeah, I guess I can talk from a personal experience. I was elected onto the FINA Athletes Committee back in 2005 and served one term, and was extremely frustrated by that process. There was no genuine opportunity for us to engage with, members of the FINA staff, let alone having any conversation with anyone on the bureau, unless you already had a personal relationship with them, or let alone engagement with the president. And then I was appointed back onto the FINA the World Aquatics Athletes Committee in Budapest last year. And just in Melbourne recently, with my chair, Alia Atkinson, and fellow member Jess Hansen, we got to sit down with the president, the executive of FINA, Brent Nowicki, and it was incredible. I mean, I just could not believe that they actually were wanting to know what the athletes want, what the athletes need. Yeah. Our WhatsApp group is just active every single day. Awesome. There's a lot of passionate people in there, and they're looking across the board. They want us to deliver, opportunities for aquatic athletes that, support them and help them develop personally and professionally. And so for me, that's really encouraging. And I'm loving being back involved in that aspect of the sport.
It's something that Brian, John, and I are we love about what we do here. We're trying to show who's behind the goggles and the cap. Swimmers are judged by their time. You see Luke Paddington, his time, and you judge him completely based on that. You have no idea who he is, what's he about, where he's going, what's about. So we're trying to bring the face to the goggles, bring the personality and the characters, to build our sport and grow our sport, but also to grow it in such a more enlightening way, if that's the right word, just a happier place to be. So I'm really glad to hear that and that change in just a year. So and I know Aaliyah, she's great, so that's awesome.
Daniel, I want to ask you a little bit about swimming and comparisons with other sports, especially because you're kind of involved now with influence in other sports. And I've always been curious about this as a distance swimmer. Not uncommon to hear people have shoulder injuries that derail their careers or start to zap the enjoyment from it. I can't imagine having a bunch of shoulder surgeries is fun. Sounds terrible. But like in track, you see as athletes age, they get into the longer events. And in triathlon, as the athletes focus on the Olympic distance, and then they get into the longer distance stuff as they age out of having that speed. And in swimming, it works like the other way around. It seems like if we ever get people to continue late in their career, they're usually giving up the longest distance and coming down in distance. Why do you think that is?
I mean, I don't know. I guess.
Me neither. That's why I'm asking you. I
guess it's one of those things. Like we start this sport at a very young age, and you lay that foundation. You have this incredible base. I mean, if I had the ability, I would have loved to have come down, but I didn't. But physically was the barrier for me. It's a really good point. I think of those triathletes who go on to do Ironman, and the fact that they have this incredible Olympic distance speed, and now all of a sudden they're banging out these Ironman times, which are incredibly quick. It's a really good question, and I'm sorry, I don't know.
But the thing is, you did have the speed though, because you were the first person in 90 something years to win a medal in the 200, the 400, and the 1500 in the same competition. Like that's a lot of range, and the 200 freestyle is an extended sprint. It's not a pure sprint, but it's long. I mean, it's you have to have speed to be able to do it, especially to medal at a major games. So obviously you had some, but what happened when you tried to swim a 50?
Like you guys joke about, I did 30 laps and we did one, but give me 30 laps any day. I mean, if I try to do a 50 sprint, I feel uncoordinated. I just have no rhythm. I all of a sudden want to breathe every stroke because I'm just so tight and wound up and panicky. It's such a skill to be able to swim that race as well as the 100. I have the utmost respect, and I appreciate what those sprint swimmers did outside the pool, which was just as much work as inside the pool. So for me, it's swimming a 50 or 100 is very, very daunting, and I will not even try it today because I would. Oof.
Okay, but shoulders, let's say you had healthy shoulders. Didn't some part of you just want to go hit the gym and like see how swole you could get and see how fast you could go over 100 or 200?
Nah, not really. It's funny, I hardly ever did any stuff in the gym. So that the thought of that was like, oh God, do I really have to do this? Because in my mind, I was like, that's going to impact my training session in the pool later today type of thing. And so I didn't really have that proper mentality or approach. I know, I just, I loved the distance stuff. If, the 800 was probably my favorite. You sort of met halfway, right? But I had no desire, and still to this day, give me a 200 and above. Doesn't have to be fast, but I don't want to be doing no lactic acid production these days.
How come they go 1200? Where's the 1200?
I know.
A 1200? No.
Yeah, why don't we do 1150? You know, why do we? Well, it's such a big gap between the 800 and 50.
Yeah. Did you enjoy training more than racing, or equal? You're training? Are you a trainer?
Love training.
Who did you train with? Example, who did you train with? What was it about it? Did you just love like conquering that set, overcoming that obstacle, having Dennis and Bill in your ear? Like, describe it. Describe what you loved about it.
I love the challenge set on the board, and then in my mind I'm like, hey, what can I hit this week? I love being able to see the gains that were being made. Every time you came around to doing a particular set again. I loved how you could play around technically. You could get a greater understanding. Okay, my stroke count is I'm up 2 strokes per 50. What's going on here? Is it fatigue? Am I tired? So being able to do that. But before I left Dennis from the Dennis Cottrell on the Gold Coast and moved down to Melbourne, Grant Hackett would get put in a lane with me when he was in trouble, which was a lot because he was a little smart ass. But when I came back to the Gold Coast, and this was in the lead up to Sydney, I'd gone from being able to lap him to him being able to lap me. But I love the challenge of just trying to see, could I keep up with him for any part of this set of 150s or the longer stuff for 400s. When we did, my most hated set ever was 30-50s, dive start on 130. And, he would be, 24 lows, even getting the 23s a couple of times. And for me, I just loved just seeing what he was capable of doing. That sort of stuff really inspired me. So at the end of the day, it was just, how could I push myself to the point of doing something that I would leave the pool and put my head on the pillow and go, yeah, that was pretty special.
Brian, 30-50th dive starts. It means you touch the wall at number 24 and you got to pull yourself out of the water. You got to get back on that block, find your balance on the blocks.
Well, they're on 130. I mean, they're on 130.
Yeah, but still, your heart rate's pounding at 24 and you got to get balance. And
I'm not making light of it. It's like my lactate production was so high that trying to get through 850s fast was quite daunting. It's interesting, though, to me that what you talk about as the most hated set for a distance swimmer was 50s, 30-50s all out. That's the one that, I hated that. I think about some horrific, crazy yardage, and it sounds like that is it's just calmness for you. You're like, okay, that's where I'm comfortable. Give me the distance. Give me the long yardage stuff. What was it like in those days you spanned a few coaches, but when were you training with Cottrell? And what was your coaching situation? Who was in your training group throughout your career? What were some of the things that you were working on within each kind of group?
Yeah, with Dennis, so I moved from a city called Adelaide at the end of sort of not finished. I had 1 year of high school and we moved up to the Gold Coast so I could train with Dennis. Dennis, he was more known as a sprint coach. He coached the first Australian under 50 in Andrew Bowden at the Commonwealth Games in 1990. He went 49.8. But I'd worked with Dennis on a training camp and I really loved his passion and his enthusiasm and his willing to, try things. And so I was very much a guinea pig. And, we did a lot of, 150s and 400s, but we didn't do a lot of mileage. It was never really any more than 7.5K a session. It was all a lot of high intensity, a lot more kick work than I'd ever done before. But like I said before, we do sessions that they would repeat, maybe every 3 or 4 weeks. And so it was a really good way to see exactly where you were when it came to, what sort of gains that you'd possibly made. I love doing things like 10 400s. So for me, that was really, really challenging, just getting in the zone. And then I stupidly, and I say that with all due respect, I left Dennis and moved to Melbourne. And my coach, Bill Nelson, was probably more focused on the yardage. We would do 8 sort of 9K sessions quite regularly. And a lot of the foundations were quite similar. It's just that was a lot more work, 300, 600s, that kind of thing. I even did one session once. It was a 1,500 for time, then 1,000 for time, then a 500 for time. I did that 6 weeks out from the Atlanta Olympics, and it was just kind of crazy stuff like that. But all my coaches, there was always that element. Mr. Carew, who was Kieran Perkins' coach, he had along with Bob Trefine, who was an exercise sports scientist. We do a lot of these heart rate sets, 3100s, or you do a 4, 3, 2, 1, 3 times, that type of stuff. And whenever we had distance camps, Mr. Carew would have the same sessions every time we'd go on a distance camp. We knew exactly what we were doing, and so both Dennis and Bill would incorporate elements of that into it as well. So at the Gold Coast, when I went back, as I mentioned before, Grant Hackett was in the pool. There was also Gian Rooney was in the pool, Kai Hurst towards the back end of my career. We had a lot of people who did triathlons and surf lifesaving, which is a huge sport down here in our squad. We had a couple of guys. Daniel Kowalski ended up going to Cal. Stephen Penfold made a couple of teams swimming 800, 1500. It was a pretty tidy group. I was very much the elder statesman, so I thrived off their enthusiasm, just how young they were, and their ability to back up. There was always be someone else leading a lane outside Grant, and so just trying to jump in there and do what I can. So it really brought the best out of all of us. It was awesome.
I do think so. In your era, when you swam the mile, the 1500, the world record dropped 16 seconds. It was like a 450 something, and went right down to when you ended at 14:34 or something. And I remember how you and Kieran Perkins approached how you raced the 1500. You changed how you raced that 1500. Talk about that. Well, how did you guys go about your racing in 1500's differences? 6-speed kick from the get-go, just get going and go. Talk about the racing of the approach you had to the 1500. So
the approach that I adopted was, I had to adopt that because that's how Kieran swam the race. You got to remember, swimming in Queensland, I couldn't even get on the podium at the state championships. The talent was so crazy. So you just had to adapt. So if Kieran's thing was you go out, you break their back in the first 100, and then you just settle into that routine, and then straight away you've got 3-4 seconds on them, and that's demoralizing. I couldn't quite get out at that speed, and so I had to be able to know that I could be within, range. And the only time I ever beat Kieran when he was not on, and so for me it was just knowing that I'm going to have to go out in a 57 and then just settle into that rhythm as soon as possible. And a lot of that training was okay. That's how we're going to train: two effort 100s straight up, and then followed by 4 to 6 100s at pace, warm down and do that four times kind of thing. And so we knew that we'd go in, you break the backs, and then you just got to hold on and get into that rhythm. And in a lot of cases it worked. The amount of 1500s that I did, where it was Kieran, myself, and then quite a bit of space back, was a lot of times. But the telling thing there was, when it wasn't going that way, how do you respond? And I did not respond very well.
Did you know? So Leah Smith was on our show, and Leah Smith said in the 800, if she was okay at the 400, she knew she could finish. No matter how much pain she was in, she knew she could put in a solid 800. Was there a point in the 1500 where you're like, okay, the wheels are off, and I can't bring this back?
Yep.
How early was that? Was that did you know you could hold on after the 1,000, and then no matter what pain you're in, you could hold on, or it didn't matter, sort of thing?
98 Commonwealth Games. So I'd gone on to another coach. I'd moved to the AIS. Bill Nelson had quit coaching. Yeah. My shoulders were really bad, and so I went to the AIS, which is it had the medical facilities and the like there. And my coach at the time at these Commonwealth Games was like, listen, you just got to attack it from the start. And at 500, I knew I was done. I was absolutely done.
500?
Yeah. And I ended up getting 4th. Rick Neathling ended up passing me with a couple of 100 meters to go. And so I finished off the podium.
There's a guy who hit the gym and then went down in distance.
Exactly.
See?
I remember lapping him at 1994 Commonwealth Games, and then 4 years later he's finishing in front of me. So that South African team in Athens was incredible.
Yeah, I agree. No, I agree. No, I agree. But that was 98 games. I mean, Grant won in 1450. Kieran was like 15 or something. Way off the world record where they're at. So all of them, they were not changing the guard in that night. Between the 94 Commonwealths, when world records were set 2 in your race, to the 98 Commonwealths, that was a real change in the guard time. And you went through that, and you came out and you were in Sydney. That was, I mean, that's longevity. That's grit. That's stick it to it. That was hardcore for your career. You want to talk about that period of 94 to 98 and going to 2000?
Yeah, 94 was, I wasn't long with Dennis at that point. And the trials, I broke 15 minutes for the first time up in Brisbane and beat Kieran, which was in many ways the worst thing I could have done because it really lit a fire in his belly. And then he goes on, as he said, he won the 2, 4, and 15 in Commonwealth Games, breaking the 800 and 1500 world record in that one swim. Then he goes to Rome a few weeks later at World Championships and goes 3:43.8 and absolutely made us all look like we were pedestrians. And so for me, I was just like, just forever chasing. But it was very surreal, the fact that I just couldn't believe I was at a World Championships. And so for me, that was very, very cool. And then going into Atlanta, Kieran and Glenn Houseman had come first and second in Barcelona. Kieran was on an absolute tear. And so there's just this massive hype, not just because of 96, but Sydney was only 4 years away too, right? So that was a huge carrot. Coming back from Atlanta, really disappointed, really dark times. I felt like I've said this, I say this all the time, I really felt like I failed. And I knew Kieran wanted to win 3 in a row. I used to train with Grant Hackett. I knew what he was going to be capable of. I'd heard of this young kid out of Sydney called Ian Thorpe. I'd seen Michael Klim go and do something really unusual for back then. He just raced. Gennady, his coach, it was like, you just got to keep racing. And then you saw what, for those swimming historians, what he did at World Championships in 1998 in Perth. So there's this young blood of talent coming through, all because Sydney was there. And from the men's freestyle side of things, it was crazy. The depth was, I think, our 200 final at trials. I came 5th, and I think our top 6 times would have been top 20 in the world. So it was, incredible to be a part of. And I was comfortable with the fact that I was going to be a relay alternate. It didn't bother me because when I looked at who was swimming the individual, I was like, even on my best day, I wasn't going to make it. And so I part of me was proud of that. It was, I didn't really love the fact that I was a relay alternate, having been swimming 4 events in the previous game, but that's where I knew I was at. And so to being a part of that particular thing was great, but there were a lot of dark times in the period between 96 and 2000 with injury, with eating disorders, just with dealing what was inside, between my ears. It was a real struggle. And that's why I really made the decision to go home and being in the safety of my mum and dad's on the Gold Coast, getting on with, life, starting back at university and just trying to normalize things. But I'm really proud to have been part of that era. And it's something I look back on with a lot of great memories.
Daniel, that strength you showed to go back and make that change, to do some self-care and take care of yourself. So kudos to you, dude. I mean, yeah, others would have continued to, it was working swimming-wise. I mean, working, in our opinion, swimming-wise over the course. But for you, you made a decision to do something to look after yourself. So kudos. And yeah, I'm glad you are around for other athletes to hear from you right now who might need this. Yeah,
I think this is one of the beauties of what you guys do, these platforms, that you, whilst it's so cool as a retired swimmer to listen to today's athletes and what they're talking about. I think of people who watch this and take something out of it that we may not ever hear or we may not ever pick up on, and that gives them something. For me, that is so powerful, and I just love that we have these opportunities today.
I didn't make it 96 games. I missed it by a 10th, and I quit swimming 2 years later. My brother qualified for 96 games, but our country wants him to qualify twice. They're like, great, can you do it again? And that didn't kill him. That drove him, and he made Sydney. Me, I said I couldn't do it, and it's inspiring for us to hear, for me to tell these stories. Hopefully, we can help the next you, me, and stuff moving forward. So, yeah, cool.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
What was more nerve-wracking, your first Olympic race or swimming in front of that crowd in Sydney?
I was in that crowd, so it's probably Sydney because I was there. I was like, get them down, 20,000 people down.
It's I remember you actually, now that I think about it.
I saw you.
Yeah. I went into that heat. I was swimming last. I hadn't had a very good preparation. By then I knew I was having shoulder reconstructive surgery post games. I was on the cortisone cycles again, and my parents and my sister and her husband were in like the third row, sort of at the start, so they didn't get to go to Atlanta. So being able to swim in front of them was pretty special, but that was kind of a nothing feeling. We were in our heat, we were fair way in front, and so it was basically like a time trial, and I didn't feel it.
You make yourself sound like a horse that you need to put out to pasture.
I tell you what, there's days I wake up right now and I wish I had been, but anyway.
But Daniel, it was the largest swimming crowd ever in history. It was 20,000 people. You have to realize that. I mean, I bought the poster of the 400 free final. It was so dominating. I have it right here. It was a lot of pressure. My brother swam the 200 free. He had been to Perth Worlds. He had been to Gutberg, Fukuoka, all in the 90s. You've been, I'm sure. He said halfway through his race, he's like, crap, I need to start racing. He was so overwhelmed by the audience and the crowd. So, and he was in Australia, and you were there. You're a defending silver medalist. I mean, that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, I think the fact that my family were there and they didn't see me race last time, I was just so grateful that I could look up and see them there. It's funny that meet in Perth in '98, that was my favorite ever meet. I absolutely loved that event. It was incredible.
Yeah. Well, why was that? Was it just being in Perth, a beautiful location, the people, or just you were on fire there and you felt it was a nice comeback from some tough times after Atlanta? Maybe.
Yeah. So we had a great training camp. We all met on like New Year's Day. The weather was stunning. Other than I think the morning of the heat of the 4x2, that rained a little bit. Everything else was blue sky. The crowd was so into it. It was so loud. We had, as a Dolphins team, we had a phenomenal performance. Our 4x2, we were under world record pace pretty much the whole way. I dived in my relax day. We were so far in front, and I don't say that like in an arrogant way, but we were. And I dived. My relax exchange was 0.6, and we missed the world record by 0.2 or 3. So
0.6. Daniel, what are you doing?
He said hi. Good swim.
We were so far in front, I didn't want to like F up. And
did you guys exchange suits?
But Thorpe had this. Thorpe had when he came into touch, he had like a long glide, like he's using that extension of those massive arms. So
you cannot blame this on the swimmer coming in.
I am. So yeah, it was almost a flat. Well, it was a flat start, really. So that was amazing. That the crowd was so loud. Yeah, it was very cool. And got a bronze in the 1500 on the final lap. I think I passed the guy from, I think he maybe was Ukrainian on the last 50. I felt a little bit bad, but it was cool.
Brian, I want to get into, for those who may not know who Daniel Kowalski is, your career, and I'm going to end with a question, but I just want to summarize very quickly. From double world champion in 93. Yes, short course, I don't give a shit. Double world champion in 93, correct? And correct me if you're wrong, okay? In the 400 mile. Worlds, gold in the relay, silver. Hand packs, gold in the 800, 96, 3 Olympic gold medals, 3, right?
Yeah.
Silver and 2 bronze. Are you
3,
reading? Yeah. So
3
3
medals.
Olympic gold medal. 3 Olympic medals in 96, 98 worlds, bronze in the mile. Then you cap it off with a gold medal. Which of those, or whatever, was your proudest race? The race, like, I so like you come. If I go to your home right now, like, Luke, this is the one that did it. This is the one that I feel most I'm proud about. Which one do you show your husband? Which one do you show your mom? Which one do you show your friends? Which one is that like? This is it.
It'd be the bronze in the 200 free in Atlanta in '96.
Is it?
Yeah.
Why?
I should not have won a medal in that. It was one of those things where it was a pure racing meet that for a lot of the men's events. It wasn't fast. I was in lane 7. I had Peter Van den Hoogenband in lane 6. I think Josh Davis was in lane 4. Daniel Loader was in 5. Gustavo was out in lane 1. And I remember my coach said to me, Bill said to me in the dining hall at lunchtime, he goes, if you're with the guy in lane 6 with 50 meters to go, you're going to win a medal. And I remember, streamlining coming off that wall, I thought, I'll have a cheeky look. And I looked and Peter was right there and I thought, holy shit. And so I literally I just went for it. And when I saw that 3 next to my name, it was the best feeling I ever felt my whole career. It was absolutely incredible.
We had Gustavo on, and he talks about that's his greatest race as well. So Daniel was on fire that meet, but Gustavo says that was when he came back, he started mowing down Daniel. But he said that's one of his proudest meets as well, even though he got silver as well. So that's interesting.
Yeah. Daniel, we got a few rapid fire questions for you to wrap up. What's the hardest race in swimming?
400 IM.
I thought you were going to say 50 free. Olympic gold or the world record?
Olympic gold.
Greatest swimming performance you ever saw live?
Grand Hackett, Montreal, 2005. Oh, actually, no, I forgot I was in Beijing. Michael Phelps.
Which one, though? The whole thing? The whole meet?
I know this is rapid fire, but I remember vividly I was on pool deck doing interviews after the races. Mm-hmm. And after that 100 fly, I could see Mike Bottom running around so I'm like, oh, something's going on here. And I'm trying to figure out what's going on. And I'm like sensing that, they're protesting or they want, to look at the camera and all the rest of it. So that was pretty cool to be that close. Also, that 4x1 free on the first section of finals was epic.
Yeah, that was an epic one to live as a teammate of Fred Bousquet at the time. We also talked to Kavik about that race and Mike Bottom too. So yeah, what an epic Olympics to see live. Good for you. If you had to swim 100 meters faster right now, what would you go? Long course.
Probably. If I had to go really fast, I could go 00.
That's pretty good.
That's pretty good, Daniel. Jeez.
Better bodysuit, Thorpe or Kathy Freeman?
I'm actually looking at the Kathy Freeman one right now. So I'm going to say Kathy Freeman. Can I do that?
Yeah, show us. Show us Kathy Freeman, the legend with the hood. There we go.
Oh, no way. Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Or I guess I could have asked you if it was the one that you wore late in your career.
No, that one got burnt.
Didn't they all? Do you pee in the pool?
If any swimmer says they don't, they're lying.
Yeah, true. What was the last year that Australia and New Zealand competed together in the Olympics under the name Australasia?
1920?
1912. What's the worst song to have stuck in your head during a hard set?
Oh, my goodness. No, I don't want to say it because then I'll start singing it now.
That's
I don't know. Anything? No, I don't know. That's a real tough question.
Oh, not an answer.
What have some people said for that?
So McIntosh said, nothing slow, it has to be fast. If it's slow, it drives her crazy. Some kids said nursery rhymes. That's the worst.
I think somebody said I'm blue, abadi, abada, abadi, da, da, da.
Yeah.
Whatever that one is. I don't know what it would be for me, but yeah, I was probably gonna say like the Vegemite sandwich thing, whatever that one is. I come from a land down under. That would be terrible for a really long set.
Oh man.
Who's the toughest trainer you've ever seen?
Oh, Grant Hackett. Hands down.
What would he say?
What
He say you?
Yeah, what have you seen? What have you seen Grant do that you were like, oh my god, can't.
It was that set of 50s I talked about before, but we do one of my favorite sets where or distances I love doing 150s, and it was so easy for him to just be going 123, 121, just push, like he, you'd leave with him and then you could sort of sit with him on his hip for the first 50 and then he'd just go and then he'd just back him up. And as we went down, 145, 140, 135, whilst he wasn't hitting 121, 123 and those, he was still getting enough rest to have a sip of water and then go again. He was incredible.
That's a whole lot of freestyle. What's the safest world record on the books?
Katie Ledecky, 804.
Yeah, I think that's safe from her now too, but oof. It's hard to argue with that. I was wondering if you were going to say the men's 800, Zhang Lin's 8 or 7, whatever stupid it is. But yeah, 804 is disgusting.
That shit, I don't have enough superlatives to describe her. My goodness.
No one does. Daniel, it's awesome to talk to you. Thanks for joining us and giving us a lens of a bit of history. And also, I'm really encouraged that you're a part of the sport and able to impact it in a really meaningful way, and in a very real way, it sounds like, with the open ears of the execs at World Aquatics. So that's very encouraging for us to hear, and all around, it's been a real pleasure. So I appreciate you joining.
Appreciate you.
Thank you, guys, and keep up the incredible work. It's great to watch.
Appreciate you.
Will do. Thanks for that. All right, that's it for this episode of Social Kick, and we'll see you later. Hey, everybody. Thanks for hanging out with us. If you're enjoying Social Kick, tell your friends about it, and be sure to tell us what you liked by leaving a comment, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on Instagram. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Social Kick, and you can find all of our content on our website,